Welcome to Sexology, a podcast that untangles the science of sex and pleasure. And now, with this week's episode, your host, clinical psychologist, Dr. Nazanin Moali.
Hello there. You are listening to another episode of the Sexology Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Nazanin Moali. Today's episode is one of the episodes from our sex work series. When it comes to sex work, there's so many misconceptions people have, and there are so many smart, business savvy women that I know that they are sex workers. And I think it would be helpful to hear their life experiences, their journey, and they're always full of great stories. And you might change your mind even about sex work. I know when people think about sex work, most people, the exposure around sex work was around trafficking. So this is not what we're talking about. Our guest today is Amy Taylor. Amy is a woman that wore so many hats. She's a commercially licensed pilot. She's been featured on Elle, so many different magazines like GQ, Maxim, Men's Health, Women's Fitness. And now she's in her 40s. She's talking about her journey of getting to sex work and how she was outed and the impact of it, and where she's in her life right now. In this episode, we continue our conversation about the common misconception people have around sex work. And we're going to talk about what is it about the job that was rewarding for her and what was challenging. So you don't want to miss this episode. It's full of great stories. Also, I know many of my clients recently, they've been asking about the resource for leaning in more to their masculine side in the bedroom. They've been talking about how their partner is asking them to be more assertive or dominant in the bedroom, and they have difficult time thinking about how would that look like? How can I channel that part of me? What positions, what actions I need to take? So I created this guide that's super cheap. It's the cost of a coffee for my clients. I leave a link in the show notes. So if you are interested to tap into that part of you or curious and need more resources around that, you want to make sure that you're getting the guide now. All right, without further ado, let's dive into the conversation with Amy Taylor. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Sexology Podcast. I am so excited to welcome Amy Taylor to our show. Amy, welcome to our show.
So good to see you again, beautiful. Hi.
Oh, lovely to see you as well. For our listeners that they don't know, this is our second date. We had a conversation on Instagram Live, and it was fantastic. I got the opportunity to learn more about Amy, and we're continuing our conversation here. Welcome to our show.
So good to see you.
Lovely to see you. Well, I know we chatted a little bit, and I'm amazed on how many different hats you wore. Like, you were a commercial pilot, you've done so many awesome things, and including doing sex work. So tell us about the journey of how you got into the world of sex work.
Yeah, so I like to do things that women aren't supposed to do. I think that's your running theme. Women don't fly planes enough. And women don't own our sexuality enough. And I just sort of didn't know to behave. And I'm not sorry. Be mad at me, world. So my journey into sex work, there was a lot of self-reflection. Obviously, there was economic need in the beginning, but it was a personal decision. It really was. I made it with thoughtfulness. I thought about it. I understood what I was getting into. Nobody forced me. I had heard about it from another person, but nobody coerced me at all. Very, very high-end companions aren't interested in recruiting their friends because they would like to date the billionaires. They're also not competitive either. There's enough for everybody, but I understood what I was doing. But yes, there was economic need. I was in graduate school. Had broken up with a rich boyfriend who was kind of paying for everything. So I was kind of a sugar baby. I was kind of a sex worker with one client for 7 years. And I loved him. But yes, his success was very attractive to me. And I'm sure my beauty, and he was 9 years older. I'm sure my relative youth was attracted to him, but it was not predatory. I almost married him, and then I chose a more free life. And I'm sure the other life would have been fine, but I chose what I chose, and I like my choices. So there was, yes, as I said, the initial income, but there is a lot of personal freedom that it offers. Sometimes not. Sometimes you're getting computer work done at 2 a.m. Ask any sex worker. 99% of our job is being in sweatpants answering emails. It's not sexy, but there is some glamour sometimes, and it's been sometimes spectacular. Other times not. It's just a job like everyone else's. But it did allow me to define my own boundaries and set my own schedule. My biotech job after undergrad, before grad school, I was yelled at once for being 10 minutes late when I was going to get coffee so that I could work harder and be awake. And I didn't even need to be there. I wasn't late for anything. So those kinds of experiences, I'm a little feisty. I follow rules. I stop at red lights. That makes sense to me, of course. But sometimes when somebody's overly controlling, I push back. It's who I am. And so there was a level of autonomy. I would rather work 10 times harder for myself. So it wasn't just the money. I had a deep value for determining my own future, even if that included making mistakes. And I've made a lot of them.
Aren't we all? And you're right that I think it's a valuable, meaningful job for many people who choose to be in the industry. You're right. Like, because of the limitations that we have for legislation, all of those things, most people, like in general public, the kind of sex work journey that they hear is people are coerced or like trafficked, which is not the case for many people that I know when I see my practice and all of that.
Well, for sure that does happen. And where that happens, that is awful. I literally think we should throw the book at human traffickers and abusive pimps and all that. Fine. I'm perfectly fine with us deleting them from the population. Like, literally, I have no sympathy. And actually, we all think that. None of us like them. They don't like us. So yes, that does exist. But those are labor issues. There's coerced, abusive labor in many industries. I'm not trying to commit whataboutism and deflect from the problems in my industry. But yes, I understand that I was at the very privileged end of no coercion, less desperation. I know this. But I reject being conflated and told that I don't know my own mind, that I don't own my own body, that the state or some church does, because I made my own decisions and largely I was okay with them. I recognized very early on that I could approach this work with respect for myself and for my clients. I turned down billionaires if they were annoying to me. Again, I know that gives me privilege others don't have. I understand that. And I'll be honest, in the beginning, in my late 20s, there was an element of curiosity and a desire to challenge societal norms, especially for women. I think that's true of a lot of young people. There is a desire to sort of challenge the status quo, and yes, sexually too. But truly, I believe the human connection is really a multifaceted thing. I've always believed that. I've had the privilege in my work of seeing intimacy in a way that a lot of people don't, because a lot of our societal norms require a lot of performative lying. I've seen behind the curtain, and my interactions have required empathy, therefore. Openness, the ability to be fully present and try not to judge, even if my instinct would have been, and maybe theirs too. Over time, yes, there's a transactional nature to all work. We all want money. We're doing a podcast for promo. There's a financial need for everything we do. That's life. But there was really, as I learned, an opportunity to foster understanding and acceptance for my clients, for their relationships, for their other parties in their relationships, which I often worked with or met, and for myself. The journey's been full of some surprising opportunities for growth.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things we talked about, and I shared with you, that many of my clients, they're comfortable kind of addressing, kind of talking about the things that they truly want in the context of sex work, right? Because sometimes when we are with a partner, we feel, oh my God, I have to show a version of myself. Maybe they're not interested in this kink or talking about this fantasy, but they're kind of like having these positive experiences with the sex worker. It can help them to feel more comfortable and show up more authentically in their relationship. And you were saying that sometimes their partner also were aware of it. Did I hear that correctly?
Sure. Sometimes I met both of them, and that was great. I obviously liked it better when the partner was aware and whether or not they were involved. Involvement's fun. I like both. I'm kinky. But I like it better when they were involved and granted permission than when the person was lying. But, obviously I met people whose partners were definitely not involved, not aware, and not okay with it. I'm not a sociopath. I feel when I am part of something that causes somebody pain. A few times, the wife called, and that doesn't feel great. And a lot of us, the tagline we say is, it's not our problem. He would have sought out somebody else. Yes, all that's true. But on the other hand, I have a conscience. It doesn't feel great. Would I have preferred it was never painful to the other person if they got caught and the person found out? Sure, of course. Usually after they yelled at me for a while, but then they found out what I was and was not in the nature of my service to their spouse or boyfriend or whatever it was, they were a lot less angry at me after a while. Because what usually happened was when the client got caught, they would lie and say that it was like an affair and I was a girlfriend. And that's because they had shame about paying for it, because society tells clients that they're scum, which is a lie. They are not. They might be, but most of the time they are not. But because they feel shame about you paid for it, they lie and say it's something else. And then the wife thinks you're trying to steal her husband and has to find out for herself that you are not. They often were less mad after a while. Sometimes the conversations ended up hilarious and the wife was not at all mad. And that relieved my guilt, I guess, in some small way. But these things are complicated, and the alternative to us not existing would not have been those men being sort of magically a perfect match in terms of sex drive and desires to their spouse. As you've seen, people have differing desires. I've known people that liked sex at different times of day, and so they were kind of incompatible and both very frustrated and both cheating because one likes morning sex and the other one hates it. So when we fall in love, we think we're going to magically be sexually compatible, and that is not always true. And so if people like me, sort of the abolitionists, if you could magically vanish all of us and we didn't exist, which you'll never be able to do, stop trying, folks. But if you could, the alternative would not just be this magical synergy between partners. It would be people finding it elsewhere. Neighbor, friend, coworker, whatever. It's because perfect compatibilities and monogamy is not what goes on, even if perhaps that would be less pain-inducing for the party that wants it. But many people are not monogamous. I met people who are totally poly and swinger, and there's all things exist. There's 8 billion of us, right? The hardest part of my journey has been the stigma associated with being part of non-monogamy that people lie about, right? There's a big stigma when you admit and certainly are part of non-monogamy, and that stigma can lead to isolation and misconception. I've had to learn how to advocate for myself. I've had to set firm boundaries with people when they find out and think I'm trash. I've had to learn to surround myself with people who respect me and my choices, and unfortunately to eliminate some people from my social circle who refuse to do so. But the upside of all that is that it's made me a lot more resilient. I know what I can stand and what I can't. It strengthens your sense of self when you examine what you believe and what you've done, because you have to sit with it. And I try to bring that kind of radical honesty into all aspects of my life. So I didn't mean to be such a deviant and challenge stereotypes so publicly, but when I got outed and I had to make lemonade, as we talked about a little bit on the live, I decided to live with the hope that humanizing one of us could contribute to a more open, respectful dialogue about people's sex lives from the perspective of somebody like me who's seen behind the curtain, so to speak.
And one thing you mentioned that is just so true in our previous conversation is people think they don't know a sex worker. I know so many quote unquote normal. When I say normal, it's like people that they do have different other jobs that they are sex worker. I know therapists that are sex workers. I know physicians that that's what they do. And sex work is has so many different facets. So I think, as you said, that people engage with this profession for a number of different reasons. I have clients that experience it being empowering, for financial gain, for connection, for advocacy, all sorts of things. And I know it's very painful when people get outed. I had clients that they were suicidal, had lots of things because they were not ashamed of the job that they've done, but the kind of like the feedback you get from people, like people that they knew from high school, from conservative areas, and the kind of emails they got was very, very painful. Do you feel comfortable telling us about your journey of how you got outed?
Yeah, well, sure. I get told 1,000 times a day that I should die. And of course, the internet, who cares? Everybody hates everybody on the internet, which I sort of love. Everyone now, hate on the internet has been democratized. So at least, no matter what you do, people on the internet have their opinions. Who cares? But when it's in person, that's much harder. Yeah. So that was a deeply, deeply challenging time. It was a little bit over a decade ago, and it was a pimp who wanted me to sell sex for him. And of course I refused. I told him to go fuck himself because that's not who I'm
Right.
You're not do that to me. And his name was David Elms. He owned a site called theeroticreview.com. And you can Google, fans listening, you can Google David Elms murder. You can read all about it. There's articles. And when I refused to tell my clients to join his pay site and write reviews, and he would charge others to read those reviews, so indirectly make money off of me. When I refused to do that, he outed me. He bought my birth name by .com, and he built a copy of my personal website out in the world, sent paper copies of it to my family. I lost my job at the time. I lost my boyfriend my boyfriend knew we were getting ready to retire. I didn't tell people because I still monetized my pay site for extra income. But that boyfriend, nice guy, I wish him the best, but he had a corporate job and he just got too scared. He got paper mail from this David Elms person.
Oh, God.
And he was so scared of his parents and his job, and he and I didn't make it. And the worst part is, at the time I was pregnant.
Oh,
it was
God.
Not, but we were going to this boyfriend and I were going to try to make it work. And I had actually made plans to move to the Pacific Northwest with the boyfriend, and we would get married and have the baby. And I miscarried.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Thank you. I was at 17 weeks. It was a boy. I hope I meet him someday. And that's between me and God. And I still struggle every single day with forgiving David Elms. I will admit that I don't forgive him. I want to. I'm not there yet. So yeah, lost the boyfriend, lost the job, lost my son. My parents didn't speak to me for 2.5 years. I was consumed with getting justice. So I went to Arizona and I just added some commercial and instructor and multi-engine tickets and flew every single day. And I lawyered up. I sued him.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Well, it turns out drug addicted pimp is an easy person to sue because they don't show up to their court dates. So if you ever sue somebody, sue a crackhead pimp because you'll win. So he didn't even come to court. So I won. We never collected the judgment. It was never about money. You're welcome, David. You can keep the money you owe me. And when I sued him, he came to Phoenix, where I was flying. He came to kill me.
Oh my God.
The major offenders unit there wanted him because they knew about him. The whole world knew about him. And they arrested him. And that is the only reason I'm alive, is thanks to the Phoenix Police Department. Certainly cops do sex workers a lot of harm, but this particular police department, while they obviously didn't like my choices, I got a stern lecture from a few of them. I'll take it. We disagree, but they are the reason I'm alive. And victim services. So he went to prison for a while. He's out. He uses a different last name. He has a job. Victim services tells me where he is. I know. And he looks like he's cleaned up his life, I think. And, he has a child who's now older. And I just hope that he never does again what he tried to do to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, Amy, I'm getting goosebumps because thank you for sharing the story. And I can imagine detailing it can be very, very powerful and painful. And, what's shocking
People need to know, though, because I underestimated. I'll admit that when I started this and all the, private jets and billionaires and fancy dinners and caviar, yes, there is all that. And the ability to buy an apartment and all that's true. But I was naive that I did not know that people like that were in this world because I come from the streets and they are. And I guess the take home lesson when he first started trying to bother me to prey on me, I should have maybe ghosted instead of telling him to go fuck off because I kind of poked a bear. I don't know what I could have done differently, but I'll admit that I was naive about evil because I hadn't seen it before I had seen the evil in this man.
Mm-hmm. How would you know? And you know what I wonder about? I think what causes harm, right? It's not people making decision of selling whatever they want to sell. it's not having legalized sex work, right? Because I feel if there was a system in place, then there wouldn't be this kind of like opportunities for people to create this much harm.
People like David Elms thrive because it is criminalized. Because if it was a real industry with, we had unions and healthcare and we could sue people who used us, like all the stuff you see in New Zealand, Canada, Australia, and most of Europe, people like him would get outcompeted because they're not smart or professional enough. There'd be like a private equity group doing a public company that would run, it'd be like strip clubs, which are definitely not perfect, but they're safer and better. Or the brothel system in Australia. It's not perfect, but it's better. Anything's better than what America does. I think America's criminalization, they just want us to die. Because I got email that when this happened, there were people who, 3 judges threw my lawsuit out because they thought, oh, well, he's disgusting, but she's trash too, so who cares if he, right? So
oh my God.
I think America just is driven by a desire to spite and punish women who have sex. Look at all the anti-choice stuff right now where they say she should just close her legs as if we get pregnant alone.
Right.
But nobody else is there. Never he should keep it in his pants. There's this permission of men will be as bad as women allowed them to be. Men are depraved. Men are disgusting. And yet it's our job to police that behavior, control it, and be better. And my argument is it was not my job to prevent David Elms. It was the law's job, and it was David Elms' job to not be such a shitbag. I think a lot of his insanity and abuse was rooted in apparently he had a major drug problem, and I'm told now that he no longer does, which of course always helps the brain work better, right? But for whatever reason, he called women his inventory. And I remember him saying that years ago, and there is the degree to which many American men think that women are to be owned and controlled as vehicles to produce their children, to do home labor, to care for parents and children and elderly, that we are sort of appliances. That's why you see a lot of divorce when women get sick, because the idea is she's a faulty appliance. It doesn't work. I need to get a new one. There is sort of this idea that we are not people. We are things to possess and control. We are inventory. We are trophies. And even when they sometimes treat us nicely, I've seen a degree to which some men don't actually think that we have the full set of human feelings and emotions and dreams and hopes that they do, which is bizarre. But there's a fundamental lack of empathy, and pimps fundamentally hate women and don't like women. None of them do. You couldn't be a pimp if you thought women were human, right? So it was great. It was a fun.
Oh, you're so resilient that, like,
I
I'm glad
you haven't turned this off by now because it's very painful.
No, but I think it's good for people to know that kind of like people's experiences and journeys, so we're not glorifying it. I think the risk exists because of a kind of criminalize the kind of like sex work that we have. And with any job, I feel there are like any like service producer, like, like I'm a psychologist, people book an appointment, come to my office. But if they are dysregulated, they're dangerous, they're not there for the right reason, I can call police. But I think with sex work, like, we're just kind of putting people in tough situations because of not providing like safety that they deserve.
And they're alone. It's work where you're alone. I mean, it's street-based stuff where you're getting into a person's car. They can literally take off with you alone in that car. So it is a disaster. But if you ask a lot of Americans, what they really believe is, who cares if she dies? It's a trash person. There are people who literally think if sex workers die, it actually cleans up a mess that should be cleaned up, and that their deaths are a good thing, which is sick, of course. That's a sick thing, but there are people who think that. Other countries do it much better. They have safety measures. There's New Zealand. She was able to sue a client. There's a case in the news. She sued a client because he didn't pay her. The only thing we have, of course, is the threat of outing clients. So that's why a lot of us like screen and do things where the client, the only reason he behaves and pays us and treats us decently is that the only trump card we have is, he's afraid of people finding out. And that's a real shame, because then what happens if things go wrong is things go to like street justice, right? And that's never what you want. So, and again, look, people, most people are behaving. This is happening 1,000 times a minute in every city, and most of the time it's just fine. But it's the one bad apple that we're supposed to create legislation to battle against, right? It's the Poisson distribution, right? It's the outlier that's the disaster. And we protect against this. I'm a pilot. In aviation, we do a lot of prep for a crash that will probably never happen in your entire career as a pilot. But we get ready for it. And somehow in sex work, we've decided we're just going to do nothing to prevent for the serial killer, right? Or the whatever, which is literally moronic, in my opinion. And that comes from these misconceptions that the heavy dose of stigma applies. You just can't get comfortable with women fucking. And that's so weird. Hey, people, all of us are here because our mom fucked. You're here is your mom took dick. So get over it.
Well, I love that. I like that in Europe that they are kind of more open-minded about sex. And I think the more we can turn things like sexual connections and intimacy, all of that to taboo, the worse it gets. The kinkiest people I see, which I love, are most conservative clients. So that's
always military, religious. Yeah. I think the transgressive nature of lying makes it more exciting for them. Yes. No, you know who are the most vanilla, boring, refreshing people on earth? Porn stars. We're like,
that makes sense.
There's nothing left to lie about. There's nothing left to hide. It's refreshing. I like them. And they're often lovely and smart. They're kind of exhibitionists, which is not my thing personally. But, you do you. The stigma, I do believe at some level, I think stigma makes it more exciting for people, because without that, they might realize it's just something we're all doing. And it's fun and beautiful, and it can be magical and spiritual, or it can just kind of be sports sex, and that's okay too. Yeah, so, and in societies where women have less power, women police each other's sexuality far more. They slut shame each other even. And that's sort of this idea of where women have less power. They're scrambling around for crumbs underneath the table that men have set for themselves. And so you'll see, like in Europe, in Scandinavia, where women are the most powerful and equal of anywhere in the world, there's very little policing of sexuality. Because women have power, have money, have rights. So, and in the societies where women have the least power, the least financial independence, the least rights, you'll see the most policing of women's sexuality, even between women. And that's because sex is this card they trade. They have to get a man to survive. Otherwise, they and their babies will be condemned to poverty. That means they have to please that man. That means he wants sexual fidelity. He wants sexual performing. Absolutely, women's power and independence is correlated with women's sexuality. And that's why in societies where men are very afraid of women, they tend to quash our sexuality. It's one of the ways in which they'd like to make us inventory.
Mm-hmm. And what a powerful but dark way of looking at things, like thinking about people as inventory. And you're right, it's not only limited to pimps or kind of like these people that paying for sex, right, or having sex organization. It's very common in society. And even the belief that people have, that they think about men are being seduced, like, but people going with another person, and they say, oh, because the woman was provocative, right? Like, not like the person's making a decision as an adult.
Viewing people as tools to get what you want is sort of the crux of narcissism. And look, there are women who do it too, that think, in my business, you'll see women who say that they hate all their clients. It's just a paycheck. I hope they're sort of venting and kidding, because that's not also a very good way to view men. Yes, we all need money to pay rent and buy food. We all know that. But people are not tools to accomplish your goal. They are souls. They are precious. Even if you don't like them, that's fine. On to the next. But people are not things. And so the reduction of any other human soul to simply a tool to accomplish your goals or get what you need that's a sort of lack of empathy that's literally destructive, because that's not what people are, right? No matter what you do, you must remember that people are humans. You don't remove the humanity. You can't. And I think in our work, you'll see some women, when they get burnout and they're tired, they find themselves being unable to have empathy and be fully present with their clients. And that's when it's kind of time to take a vacation, and maybe at any work, right? You have to be fully present for your clients. And sometimes where you don't have much to give, you need a little break. That's fine.
Absolutely. I think kind of being able to have balance, if you have the luxury of it, that's really important and can be helpful. And again, many people choose to pay for sex for a number of different reasons, right? There could be that there is this person that they want to have the experience. I know many of people, they don't want to feel the burden of kind of performance, as we were talking about. They just want to be their true self, and they want to have kind of show their authentic self, and they don't give themselves permission unless they are in this arranged and defined context. What are some of the, like, usually people who are kind of like hiring sex worker, like based on what you heard, is that do they want vanilla sex? Are they kind of paying more for kinky sex? What are some of the common requests?
So obviously, if anybody ever said to me, I would like to pay for sex, then they never met me, because that's criminalized in America. So I had to operate from, it's always a date. There is no sex promised or given. If they asked for it, I left. And I did many times, because not allowed to sell that. They are not allowed to even ask that. If they even asked it. That said, some of the relationships I had, I ended up sleeping with them because I wanted to, not because they paid. I never felt coerced. And sometimes that sex was something different than I was used to. And that for me was quite fun. It was part of the exploration of my adulthood, which is quite normal. Like everyone does. The email I get that is openly requesting paid sex, which unfortunately I can never see any of those people, but I get 100 a day of those. It is often they want activities that are kind of outside what you would think of as in my dating life. I've met people who are kind of kinky and struggle in their relationships because they struggle to find somebody who's compatible. I've seen that. One of the hottest guys I ever dated, super hot, but only liked feet stuff. And like only. And even I, after a while, was like, dude, it's cool, but like just the feet thing all the time. And, you know, he's still single because he's going to have to find some girl who's just really into feet, I guess. But I tried. I was cool with it, but like I like a plethora of things. But yes, people, at the high end, it's very much not about sex. My clients, we've been seeing each other for over a decade. We go on vacations together, a lot of food, a lot of events. I was able to do well in business because I'm fairly skilled at a variety of things. Like I can ski and scuba dive, play polo and golf. So I think I did a lot of business because guys couldn't find somebody that was single, available, from a good family, beautiful, educated, could do all the hobbies they can do. Because I was raised upper middle class, right? And then the common background, like I was in a sorority and went to a good school. And that's, a lot of the men I saw were very status conscious, and they're snobs, and they were looking for somebody who felt more like they were part of their real world, and yet was beautiful and was not going to try to marry them. And the thing that made me so good at this work is I do not want to be a wife. I very much enjoy my freedom. I suppose I'm like those geishas of Japan where they embrace the freedom of the job. I am quite happy being a courtesan. I truly am. I've turned down many marriage proposals.
I'm sure.
And no judgment. Other people want to be a wife. Cool. You do you. I don't. So that made it very easy to me to be a girlfriend and not be pressuring them for what a regular girlfriend would inevitably do, especially when they're rich and attractive. You know, girls are going to try to marry them. I don't want to. I don't want to be your wife. I don't want to have your kids. So I don't think I never came at it with a script of what would or would not happen sexually. And the men that I had relationships with, honestly, tended not to be like super sex addict type of men. I turned down the ones who led with that. These guys were addicted to work and success, and sex is kind of an afterthought. They had sex drives, but they're pretty vanilla. They wanted a pretty woman to be nice to them, make love, and then they wanted to go to sleep and get up early in the morning and work. So and I met many men, there was nothing physical at all. Some of them were just rich and they like to be around beautiful, nice people, and they got the cash to pay for everything. So one of my favorite clients, he's passed away now, but he had some heart disease and stroke issues. There was no sex even possible. Another one was very morbidly obese. There was no way he could have had sex with anybody. He was brilliant and funny, and I really cared about him. When we once went to Vegas for a week on vacation, I saw kind of a bachelor party group of young, good-looking men, and they were snickering at me, this fat guy. And I got very defensive because by then I cared about my client. Even though, yes, it's business, I thought, how dare they? Like, just because he's not as good looking as they are, well, he's smarter, richer, more interesting, more talented. Like, just because your face is symmetrical and you're thinner, you're not better. I find it very odd that most people choose their mate based on physical, which fades and can change. I chose my clients and my civilian relationships based on one thing. How does that man treat me? And I think that makes more sense. And yes, that does include, if he's successful, he can do more fun stuff. A guy who's rich can take you to the Super Bowl, and a guy who's broke doesn't even pay for your dinner. So yes, money is a little bit of that. It's not everything. If he's a jerk, I don't give a shit how rich he is. But I think the sex acts, they vary. I once went on a date. That was like a regular Tinder date with a guy who only liked like role play. And he had a whole, the third or fourth date, it's coming to where we're gonna have sex. And he had this script. He wanted like me to play like kind of like a spy / secret agent. I'll admit I'm not a good enough actress. I tried, but it was weird for me. I think I'm just a bad actress, I guess. But for some people, I think role play is a thing where they feel more sexy if they're not themselves. It's like freeing. Perhaps I felt more sexy being Amy because she was the best parts of me. She was glamorous and confident and could march into a, $20,000 a night hotel suite and feel like it's normal. In my real life, I don't belong there. I'm an upper middle class kid from Northern California. So perhaps we all invent a role to be what we'd like to be in sex or in dating. I think that's probably to some degree true for a lot of us. But in the end, it was largely easy for me because I love dating. I'm born for romance and taking vacations together and going out to dinner. Like, I honestly would do it for free. I just don't have to. And so the personal adaptability and making someone happy and yes, being sexy, I enjoy those things. I would do them anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for your transparency, sharing all these interesting stories. And I feel like me and you can chat for hours because we have so many things in common. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you for humanizing one of us. I think people should see that there are some of us in it who are relatively okay.
Many people are. Like, I feel protective of my clients when you say that. Many of my clients, it's like this kind of similar thing that you're saying that, I'm already like people enjoying my beauty. I choose to make money out of it. I think it's as simple as that.
They say when you find what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And I think it sort of found me. And I think we have a lot to teach the world about clear communication because of, like you said, the freedom of an arrangement. People can sort of be more honest about what they need. Not in criminalized America, but hopefully someday. I think we're lying in America about what intimacy should look like. And yet there's millions of people like me and our clients running around knowing what intimacy really does look like. And consensual adult sex work brings value and fulfillment to people. And to those of us who tell me I'm unskilled, you try it. You probably couldn't make a dime. I joke.
I know. But there's a little bit truth to that.
Well, maybe not, but it requires on both sides some interpersonal skills and patience, navigating diverse personalities, managing expectations, communicating clearly when things don't go right. And that happens. It's kind of funny sometimes, but it's those of us who do this have weighed the pros and cons and chosen what's best for us. And perhaps our children and our families in many cases. As you know, many sex workers are mothers and wives. And so to succeed as a sex worker, you have to be pretty fucking awesome. And we're not going anywhere. Neither are our clients. Stop telling us we're all scum because we're not. You guys, somebody who's a client. You probably just don't know it. And if you could just see all of us as human, then we could foster a more respectful and understanding perspective about human nature, including the secrets we're all hiding, right?
100% agree. And I think thank you for it. And it takes lots of courage to have this conversation. And I know you mentioned that person outed you, but I think I'm sure anytime you come on the shows, anytime you're talking about these things, then you open up part of yourself and you might get some pushback. So I appreciate your sharing parts of yourself and vulnerable stories with our listeners. So if our listeners want to get a hold of you, you have a huge following in social media, you have so many different professions and services that you offer. So where can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, I mean, I still do brand deals. I still model. If the check's clear, might as well. I got this body, this face. I'm going to use it. So I'm on Amy Taylor. I'm Amy Taylor NYC on most socials if you want to keep up with what I'm up to or my ramblings. And yeah, I would ask people, if you hear somebody tell a dead hooker joke, or if you hear somebody talk about them as being wastes of flesh and useless people, then, maybe if you dare, send them the link to this show, or if you can stick your neck out, each person that you try to help see us as human, I liken it to the fight for LGBTQ rights or immigrants' rights or anybody who's not in the norm. I think we've always been here and we always will be. And yes, I am making lemonade after a very traumatic outing. I no longer care what people think of me. If you think bad things of me, I've already heard it and I don't care. But if you are an ally or want to be, then yeah, get in touch, say hi, and don't be afraid to see us as human, because we're pushing for our rights, and I think we're going to get there.
Well, thank you, Amy. It was lovely to chat with you, and hopefully we'll have you in future episodes.
Anytime.
Bye there. I hope this series has helped you to look at some of the stereotypes that you have in your mind when it comes to sex work, and hopefully we can help you to hear people's story, and through those story can understand people in this industry. And as we talked about, there's a spectrum of sex work, right? Some people are doing erotic dancing, some people adult film stars, we have BDSM workers, high-end escorts. So it's interesting to have people from different aspects of the industry. In the next episode, we're going to talk about how is it to parent a child as a sex worker. You want to make sure that you are following our show so you'll get notified when the next episode goes live. We're talking about a documentary director who was a sex worker and created this beautiful documentary on this topic. Also, if you find our show useful, it really means a lot to me if you take a moment and give us an honest review on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening to this show. It really helps us with visibility, and also it helps me more encouraged to continue with this journey. This is the 8th year I'm doing this, and this is a passion project for me. So I hope that you're having my back with writing this review, and I love you for that. All right, thank you for listening, and I'll chat with you next week. Thanks for listening to Sexology